What if the safest place you knew suddenly became the most dangerous? Imagine boarding a plane with your family, believing it was just another ordinary trip. Then, in the blink of an eye, your teenage son is accused, restrained, and tasered. His only crime was asking to use the restroom. In that moment, what would you do? Would you freeze in shock, unable to move, or would you find the strength to stand against an injustice that cuts deeper than words? Now picture being his father, not just any father, but a man who has spent his entire life fighting for justice in courtrooms. And now, justice isn't an abstract principle. It's lying on the floor, trembling in pain, wearing your son's face. Do you accept silence and a hollow apology? Or do you risk everything to fight back, not just for him, but for countless others who may never have a voice? If this were your family, your child, your choice, what would you do? Stay with us, because this story will not just move you, it will challenge you. Like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss the journey that begins with one boy and grows into something much bigger. The cabin was alive with the hum of late-night travel. Passengers leaned against headrests, seatback screens flickered with silent movies, and the overhead lights glowed a dim amber. It was supposed to be an uneventful cross-country flight from Atlanta to San Francisco. For most people on board, it would be just that. But for one family, everything was about to unravel. It started with a scream. A sharp, piercing cry tore through the quiet cabin, shattering the routine drone of the engines. Phones whipped into the air as startled passengers turned to find the source. In the middle section, a teenage boy 16 years old, tall, wiry, still with the softness of youth in his face, was convulsing in his seat. His arms jerked uncontrollably, legs trembling against the floor. Beside him, his younger sister shrieked again, her small hands fumbling with her phone as she hit record. The red dot blinked on her screen, capturing every second. The source of the chaos stood over him, a flight attendant, uniform pressed sharp, face tight with something that looked less like fear and more like anger. In her hand, clutched with a white-knuckled grip, was a small black taser illegal on any aircraft, unauthorized by any airline policy. And yet here it was, crackling faintly with the charge that had just ripped through a boy's chest. For a moment, time itself seemed to stall. The boy's head snapped back, eyes wide with terror. His body stiffened and then collapsed against the seat. His lips parted, a weak gasp escaping as though the air had been stolen from his lungs. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the scream. Then another voice, deep, commanding, filled with both fury and fear. "Stop! That's my son." All eyes turned to the man rising from his seat a few rows away. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a blazer now rumpled from hours of travel. His presence filled the aisle even before he spoke again. "I'm Marcus Ellington, civil rights attorney, and that boy you just tasered is my child." The cabin froze. The passengers, who had been halfway to pulling out headphones or whispering in confusion, now fell silent. The only sounds were the soft chimes of seatbelt signs and the labored breaths of the teenager still trembling from the electric shock. Marcus knelt beside his son, one hand pressing against the boy's chest, the other steadying his head, his eyes dark, fierce, unyielding, locked onto the flight attendant still holding the taser. "What have you done?" he asked, voice low, but carrying through the cabin like thunder rolling over distant hills. She stammered, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came. For the first time, Passengers noticed her trembling hands, the sweat gathering at her temple. She tried to speak, to justify, but the charge in Marcus's voice cut her off. "You assaulted a minor. On an aircraft." For what? For existing phones were everywhere now. Half the cabin had turned into a sea of recording lenses, each capturing angles, each documenting. The hum of the jet engines was drowned out by whispered commentary. "She really tased him. That's a kid. Oh my God, is he breathing?" Marcus leaned closer to his son, whispering words only a father could Jordan. "Stay with me. You're safe. I've got you." His hand brushed over his son's hair, smoothing it back, anchoring himself in the small act of comfort while his mind screamed with the weight of everything else. Rage, fear, disbelief. He had spent his entire career in courtrooms, dismantling injustice piece by piece, fighting systemic bias with precision and patience. Yet none of those victories mattered in this moment, because all the power in the world couldn't undo the sight of his own child lying limp under the glow of an aircraft ceiling light. The girl with the phone, his daughter Leah, was sobbing, but steady. Even at 12 years old, she knew instinctively what mattered. Keep recording. Her hands shook, but her resolve did not. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some stood, half ready to intervene. A man in the aisle whispered, "Should we call for the pilot?" Another muttered, "They can't do this. Not to a kid." And then Jordan moved. A shallow, ragged breath filled his chest. His eyes fluttered, half closed, glazed. Relief rushed through Marcus, so sharp it nearly buckled him. He turned back to the flight attendant. "Put that weapon down," he ordered, voice iron. For a second, the entire world balanced on the edge of her hesitation. Her knuckles whitened around the taser, her lips pressed thin, but under the weight of dozens of recording phones, under the gaze of a father's fury, she slowly lowered her arm. The charge of the taser fizzled out with a soft, dying crackle. Marcus didn't waste another second. He looked up, straight into the nearest phone camera, his voice resonating through the cabin like the opening statement of a trial. "Everyone here, you're witnesses. Record everything. Remember everything. Tonight is not just about my son. It's about every child who has ever been seen as a threat instead of a human being." The hush that followed was different this time. Not fear, not confusion, something heavier, recognition. The passengers, strangers bound together by chance, felt it settle in their bones. They were no longer just travelers on a flight. They were participants in something that would ripple far beyond the cabin walls. As the engines droned on toward San Francisco, the story of Flight 2289 was already being written, not by the airline, not by the crew, but by every phone lens pointed toward the aisle, and by the father whose voice, calm yet unbreakable, had just declared that justice would not wait for landing. The cabin had quieted again, but it was the uneasy quiet of people who had just witnessed something that would not leave them soon. The hum of the engines filled the space between shallow breaths and nervous whispers. Marcus kept his hand on Jordan's shoulder, grounding him, reminding himself that his son was still alive. Each rise and fall of the boy's chest was a fragile reassurance. Leah pressed her phone tight against her chest for a moment, then looked at her father. Her eyes were wide, brimming with tears but steady. She had inherited his resolve, the way he could stand tall even when the earth itself seemed to tilt. Marcus gave her a single nod. She understood. Keep the truth alive. He sat back in his seat, his mind racing not just through the events of the last 5 minutes, but through the years that had led him here. The past was never really gone. It was stitched into his bones, rising to the surface in moments like this. Marcus Ellington was not just a CEO. He was not just an attorney. He was a man born from a lineage of battles fought in silence and shouted in protest. His father had marched in Selma, beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for daring to believe his voice belonged at the ballot box. His mother had cleaned offices by day and taught Marcus at night to never let the world tell him what he could not be. As a boy in Alabama, Marcus had been 12, the same age Leah was now, when a shopkeeper accused him of stealing a candy bar he hadn't touched. He still remembered the sting of that day, the heat on his cheeks, the shame of being searched in front of his friends. He had promised himself then someday he would stand in places where his voice couldn't be ignored. He would build a life where no one could call him less. And yet here he was, decades later, watching his son's life nearly ripped away in a single careless act. All the degrees, all the victories in court, the boardrooms where his word carried weight, it meant nothing when a woman in uniform looked at his son and saw danger instead of humanity. He closed his eyes briefly. Danielle's voice came to him like a memory, gentle but firm. Marcus, you can't fight every battle with fire. Sometimes you have to choose the moment that matters most. She wasn't on this flight, but her presence lingered in him. She had been his anchor through years of trial and exhaustion, through nights when he came home carrying the weight of other people's pain. She reminded him that their children needed not just a warrior, but a father who could sit at the dinner table and laugh. Jordan stirred beside him, a faint groan slipping from his lips. Marcus bent low. "It's okay, son. Just breathe. I'm here." Jordan blinked slowly, his gaze unfocused but searching. When his eyes finally landed on his father, Marcus felt something inside him fracture. The boy was trying to be brave, even now. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but only a rasp came out. Marcus squeezed his hand. "Save your strength." Leah wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. "Dad," she whispered, leaning close, "people online are already watching. There are comments coming in. They're saying this isn't right. They're saying they believe us." Marcus almost smiled. In another life, he would have told her to put the phone away, to enjoy being a child. But tonight, that phone was armor. That live stream was their lifeline. "Keep recording," he said softly. "The truth doesn't fade when it's shared." From across the aisle, a woman cleared her throat. She had a sharp bob haircut and eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Janet Morales," she said quietly, leaning forward. "Assistant U.S. Attorney, Northern District of California. What happened here is a federal crime. I'll stand with you when we land." Marcus studied her for a moment, searching her expression for doubt, for hesitation. He found none. Her voice was steady, the voice of someone used to speaking in courtrooms where justice was often an uphill climb. He gave her a brief nod of gratitude. The man seated behind her leaned into the aisle as well. "Name's Derek Lane," he said. "Retired LAPD. That taser should have never been on this plane. I saw everything. You've got my word." One by one, the cabin seemed to shift. What had started as fear was becoming something else, solidarity. Marcus felt it ripple through the passengers, the recognition that they were part of something larger than themselves. The weight of silence was breaking. Still, inside him, a storm raged. He looked down at Jordan again. His son's face was pale, beads of sweat on his forehead. This boy loved building machines, tinkering with circuits late into the night, dreaming of universities where innovation thrived. He had a future so bright it sometimes startled Marcus. And yet, tonight, a stranger had nearly stolen it because of nothing more than the color of his skin and the assumptions it carried. Marcus's jaw tightened. How many fathers had sat where I am, whispering to a child who should never have been in danger? How many had walked away from planes, buses, sidewalks, courtrooms, carrying the same wound? The answer was too many, always too many. He straightened in his seat, his spine rigid with determination. This flight was no longer just transportation from one city to another. It had become a battleground, and every decision he made from here on would echo far beyond row numbers and seat assignments. He looked around the cabin again. Some passengers still avoided his eyes, shifting uncomfortably, unwilling to choose a side. Others, however, stared back with quiet strength, phones raised, lips pressed thin with anger. They would not forget. Leah touched his arm. "Dad," she said softly, "what happens when we land?" Marcus turned to her, searching her young face. He saw Danielle's resilience in her eyes, his own stubbornness in the set of her jaw. She was only 12, but she was already asking the question adults feared most. "What happens," he said slowly, "is that we tell the truth, all of it, and we don't let them bury it." Leah nodded, her chin trembling but resolute. Jordan stirred again, a faint sound escaping his throat. Marcus brushed his son's hair back, whispering another promise he prayed he could keep. "You're going to be okay. I won't let them take anything else from you." The engines roared beneath them, steady and unfeeling, carrying the plane westward, outside the windows. The sky stretched dark and endless. Inside, though, something profound had shifted. This was no longer just a flight. It was a reckoning. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, pulling in a deep breath. When he opened them again, the lawyer, the CEO, the father all of him was sharpened into a single, unshakable purpose. What had begun as violence would end in truth. And truth, once spoken aloud, could not be undone. Hours earlier, before the scream, before the taser, the Ellington family had settled into their seats with the easy rhythm of travelers who had done this many times before. Marcus had chosen seats near the front of the cabin first class, a luxury he never flaunted, but one he allowed himself when traveling with his children. It wasn't about the champagne or the legroom. It was about dignity. He wanted his kids to know they belonged in every room, every space, without apology. Jordan had taken the window seat, his favorite laptop balanced on his knees as he tapped through a program he'd written. He had been building a small robot for weeks, a contraption made of scraps from old electronics. As the plane taxied, he had leaned toward his dad, whispering excitedly about how the robot's arm could now pick up a pencil and write the first letter of his name. Marcus had smiled, pride swelling in his chest. His son's mind was restless, inventive, never content with good enough. Leah, just 12, had a small camcorder she insisted on bringing everywhere, even when her parents told her the phone was enough. She liked the feel of a real camera in her hands. Now she was filming a little travel diary, pointing the lens at her brother, at her mom, at the rows of passengers finding their seats. "Day 1 of Dad's big trip," she narrated playfully. "We're flying from Atlanta to San Francisco. Dad's getting some fancy award. But don't let him fool you. He still can't cook breakfast without burning toast." Danielle had laughed, nudging Marcus, who only rolled his eyes with a grin. Danielle herself had settled into the aisle seat, pulling out a novel she'd been trying to finish for months. She was always patient with the interruptions. Her work as a clinical psychologist meant she was used to pauses, listening, responding. She had learned to read her husband better than anyone, even tonight. She could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the way he double-checked his watch before takeoff, as if the flight itself were a test. "Marcus," she had murmured softly, resting her hand on his arm. "Relax. It's just a trip. They'll honor you. We'll enjoy the city. We'll come home." He had nodded, though part of him was always on guard. He had fought too many battles to ever believe he could truly lower his defenses. Yet he tried. For her. For the children. He leaned back in his seat, listening to the steady whir of the engines, telling himself, just another flight. The first hour passed peacefully. Drinks were served. Small trays of pretzels passed around. Leah filmed snippets of Jordan explaining his robotics project, adding captions she thought would be funny. Danielle offered to quiz Marcus on his upcoming speech, but he waved her off with a smile, joking that she knew it better than he did. For a while, it was easy to believe this night would be like any other. Still, Marcus noticed things. The way Clara Hastings, the lead flight attendant, looked at his family with an expression that was neither welcoming nor neutral. The way she hovered just a second longer near their row, as if assessing them. He pushed the thought aside, unwilling to spoil the mood, but the weight of her gaze stayed with him. Jordan, oblivious, asked for a soda. Clara passed him by without a word, delivering drinks to the row behind them first. Marcus saw the slight confusion in his son's face, the way he hesitated before speaking up. When he finally repeated his request, Clara's response was clipped, as if his voice were an inconvenience. She handed him the can, without ice, without a glass, moving on before he could say thank you. Marcus felt a flicker of heat rise in his chest. He wanted to call it out right then, but he caught Danielle's eyes, her calm shake of the head, her silent plea, "Not yet." He exhaled slowly, reminding himself that not every battle had to be waged in the moment. Still, his stomach tightened. He had learned to recognize the patterns. Small slights that built toward something heavier. Leah, watching through her lens, caught the exchange. She zoomed in on her brother's face, the half-smile he gave, pretending it didn't matter. Later, she would replay that clip again and again, realizing it was the first sign of what was coming. As the plane leveled off, Jordan opened his laptop again, showing Marcus a line of code. "Look, Dad, if I tweak this, the robot doesn't just write J, it can do O too. Eventually, I'll get it to spell my whole name." Marcus laughed softly, ruffling his son's hair. One letter at a time. Son. The world wasn't built in a day, but robots might be. Jordan shot back with a grin. His humor was quick, his mind sharper than most adults Marcus knew. And yet, he was still 16, still a boy who loved music, who sometimes left socks on the living room floor, who dreamed of building machines that could make life easier for people who didn't have much. Danielle reached over, touching Marcus's hand. "He's your mirror," she whispered. Marcus looked at her, at the truth in her words. He saw himself in Jordan's stubbornness, in his refusal to accept limits. But he also saw the risk that same fire had nearly consumed him as a young man. When every closed door felt like a wall he had to break through, he thought back to his own father, working long hours at the factory, coming home with grease-stained hands and eyes that never stopped scanning for danger. His father had carried the scars of being pushed out of spaces he had every right to enter. Marcus had sworn his children would never feel that same weight. Yet sitting on this flight, watching the way Clara moved past them without acknowledgement, He felt that oath slipping. The quiet moments stretched. Leah filmed Danielle pretending to snore, Jordan making silly faces at the camera. Passengers around them read newspapers, tapped on tablets, dozed under blankets. It was, in so many ways, perfectly ordinary. But Marcus's instincts didn't settle. The rhythm of the flight felt off, as though something invisible had shifted. He tried to focus on his speech, on the award ceremony ahead, but the words blurred. Instead, his mind replayed the way Clara's eyes had narrowed at Jordan, the way her lips tightened each time she walked past their row. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes. Danielle's voice whispered again in memory, "Choose your moment." He knew that advice had saved him more times than he could count. But he also knew sometimes the moment chose you, whether you were ready or not. When he opened his eyes again, Jordan was leaning against the window, sketching designs for a new circuit in his notebook. Leah was filming the clouds drifting by. Danielle was turning a page in her novel. And Marcus, for just a heartbeat, allowed himself to believe it might be enough that the storm he sensed could pass them by. He was wrong. The seatbelt sign had dimmed, and a quiet lull spread across the cabin. Marcus sipped from a paper cup of coffee, its bitterness grounding him in the steady rhythm of flight. Around them, passengers had settled into their routines, earbuds and neck pillows fastened, screens flickering with old sitcoms. It could have been any other trip. Yet Marcus felt the shift. The air had changed. He could sense it the way a seasoned sailor senses a storm long before the clouds gather. Jordan set his notebook aside and stood, stretching his long arms. He leaned across his dad's shoulder, whispering, "I'm going to grab some water." "Okay." Marcus nodded. It was such an ordinary request, one no father should have to second guess. But his eyes tracked Jordan as he walked up the aisle, waiting in the small line forming near the galley. Clara Hastings was there. She moved with the clipped efficiency of a woman who had performed this routine hundreds of times. But when Jordan stepped forward, her posture stiffened. She bent slightly toward him, voice sharp enough for Marcus to catch. "You need to wait. We're prioritizing other guests right now." Jordan blinked, confused. He glanced at the older man in front of him, who had just been handed a glass of water without delay. "I'm sorry. I only need—" "Take your seat." Clara cut him off, her lips pressed into a thin line. Marcus rose, every muscle taut. Danielle's hand caught his wrist before he could take a step. "Not yet," she murmured, her tone calm but urgent. "Let's see." Marcus hated the restraint in that moment, hated the way his son's shoulders slumped as he returned down the aisle. Empty-handed. Jordan slipped back into his seat with a half-hearted smile. "Guess I wasn't thirsty after all." But Marcus saw through it. He saw the boy's throat tighten as he swallowed hard, saw how he ducked his head to avoid his father's gaze. Leah had captured it all. Her camera tilted just enough to record Clara's dismissal, Jordan's quiet retreat, and the passengers who watched without speaking. She lowered the camcorder and whispered, "Dad." "Should I post this part?" Marcus exhaled slowly, weighing his answer. His instinct as an attorney told him evidence was everything, but his instinct as a father told him he didn't want the world seeing his son diminished. "Keep it," he said softly. "We'll decide later." A few rows back, Janet Morales noticed too. She scribbled in a small leather notebook, her eyes flicking between the Ellington family and Clara. She had spent years prosecuting cases of discrimination, but rarely had she seen it play out so blatantly, so casually, in public. Her jaw tightened as she wrote. Jordan tried to distract himself by pulling out his laptop again, tapping nervously at the keys. But the rhythm was gone. His code lines blurred. He finally shut the device and stared out the window, his reflection fractured against the dark sky. Marcus leaned close, speaking low enough for only his son to hear. "You did nothing wrong." Jordan's lips quirked into a crooked smile. "It's fine, Dad. Doesn't matter." But Marcus knew better. He remembered saying those same words as a boy, when his father told him not to let the cruelty of others define him. He remembered the way the words never rang true, how they settled like stones in his chest. The flight pressed on. Meal service began, carts rattling down the aisles. Clara's voice carried as she greeted passengers with rehearsed warmth, her tone noticeably softer with others than it had been with Jordan. When she reached their row, she barely glanced at him before sliding a tray toward Danielle. Jordan cleared his throat. "Excuse me, could I?" Clara interrupted without looking up. "We'll see if there's enough left." Danielle's head snapped up, her patience fraying. "He's a paying passenger, just like everyone else here." Clara's eyes flicked toward her, expression tight. "I'll check," she said curtly, pushing the cart forward. The exchange left a silence heavier than the engine hum. Leah set her camera in her lap, recording without lifting it. Marcus rubbed his temples, trying to contain the heat rising in him. He had been here before in boardrooms where his words were second-guessed, in courtrooms where his clients' truths were questioned. But when it was his son, 16, and still learning who he was, the injustice cut deeper. Jordan sat back, crossing his arms. His attempt at nonchalance only made him look younger, smaller. Marcus saw the tension in his jaw, the quiet shame he tried to hide. "Look at me, son," Marcus said quietly. Jordan lifted his eyes. "You belong here. Don't ever forget that. For a moment." Jordan's gaze softened, but beneath it was something Marcus dreaded, a seed of doubt, planted by a stranger's careless cruelty. The plane rocked gently as it hit a pocket of turbulence, a ripple that sent drinks swaying in their cups. Marcus steadied his own, but inside he felt no balance. His instincts screamed that this was only the beginning. He had seen enough battles to know when the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Derek Lane, the retired LAPD officer, leaned forward from his seat across the aisle. His deep voice carried low but steady. "I saw what she did." "You're not imagining it?" Marcus met his eyes, reading the sincerity there. Derek's expression was the weathered face of a man who had seen both sides of power, the authority of a badge, the reality of bias. He gave a subtle nod, as if to say, "I've got your back." It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind Marcus he wasn't alone. Danielle touched his arm again, her calm voice weaving through his anger. "Choose your moment," she repeated softly. "He needs you steady more than loud right now." Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He knew she was right, but he also knew moments had a way of choosing themselves. And when they did, he would be ready. The cabin lights dimmed, signaling night mode. Passengers settled under thin blankets, screens glowing faintly in the dark. But for Marcus, the quiet felt deceptive. Every nerve in his body told him the cracks had only just begun to show. The hours in the air always felt longer at night. The cabin had grown hushed, shadows stretching over the aisles as reading lights glowed like tiny stars above each row. Most passengers sank into the lull of long-distance travel, but Marcus's senses sharpened instead of softening. He could feel it, the edge in the air, the way Clara's presence lingered near their row as though waiting for something more. Jordan shifted in his seat, restless. He had been drinking small sips from the can of soda Danielle had coaxed from another attendant, but Marcus could see the stiffness in his son's movements. Jordan checked his watch, lips moving silently as if counting down minutes. Then he leaned toward his father. "Dad, I need to take my pill. It's time." Marcus nodded immediately. He knew what that meant. Jordan's medication schedule wasn't negotiable. The pill steadied his heart rhythm. "Go on, son. Take care of it." Jordan rose, clutching the small pill case in his hand, and headed toward the restroom at the front of the cabin. Leah instinctively lifted her camcorder, tilting it just enough to follow him without being obvious. Danielle touched Marcus's arm again, but this time her restraint was gone. She was tense, her eyes narrowed. At the front. Clara intercepted Jordan. She stepped into the narrow aisle just as he reached for the restroom door handle. "Not here," she said flatly. Jordan frowned. "I just need a minute. I need to take my medication." Clara's expression didn't soften. "These facilities are for premium guests only. You'll need to use the one in coach." Marcus was on his feet in seconds, his voice firm but controlled. "He is a premium guest. We're all seated in this cabin. You know that." Clara turned her head slightly, her lips twisting into something between disdain and a smile. "Then perhaps you should teach him how to respect the rules." Passengers nearby stiffened. A couple turned their heads, uncomfortable. Someone muttered under their breath, though no one spoke up loud enough. Jordan's hand trembled as he clutched the pill case. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking just enough to break Marcus's heart. "I just need water to take this." Clara shook her head, unmoved. "Back to your seat. Now." Marcus felt the old fury he had carried since his boyhood rising like fire in his chest. He took a step forward, every inch of him radiating the authority of years in courtrooms and boardrooms. "I will not ask you again. Let him take his medication here." Leah's camera caught everything the steel in her father's voice, the rigid line of Clara's jaw, the collective breath of the cabin as tension thickened. Danielle had risen now, too, her voice softer but cutting through the silence. "He has a medical condition. If he doesn't take this pill on time, it could be dangerous." For a moment, Clara hesitated. Something flickered across her face. Doubt, calculation, but it vanished quickly, replaced by defiance. "Coach restrooms are available." Jordan's shoulders hunched. His pride clashed with his need, his young voice finally breaking. "Why are you doing this to me?" That was when Janet Morales stood. She spoke calmly, but with unmistakable weight. "I am a federal prosecutor. I've observed enough. This young man has the right to medical care without obstruction. You are crossing a line, and I strongly advise you to step back." Clara's eyes flicked toward her, narrowing, but before she could respond, Derek Lane rose as well. His voice was low, steady, seasoned by years of authority. "Ma'am, you're in violation of FAA safety codes right now. I suggest you think twice." The cabin shifted again. Where silence had reigned before, murmurs began. Passengers whispered to each other, phones tilted higher, recording. Marcus saw the momentum turning. For the first time, Clara seemed aware that the eyes on her were not just annoyed travelers, but witnesses, citizens ready to hold her accountable. Still, instead of backing down, she tightened her grip on the edge of her service cart, her jaw clenched. "If you continue to disrupt, I'll call for security upon landing." Marcus let out a long breath. His voice dropped, quieter but colder than before. "You've already made sure there will be security waiting. Not for us. For you. Jordan's hand shook as he fumbled with the pill case. Danielle slipped an arm around his shoulders, guiding him back into their row. She poured water from her own bottle, holding it steady as he swallowed the tablet. His eyes closed in relief, but the tension in his face lingered. Leah lowered the camcorder, her voice barely audible. "Dad, it's all on tape." Marcus nodded, his chest heavy. His daughter didn't fully understand yet, but she would. What mattered now wasn't just survival. It was truth, captured, undeniable. The rest of the cabin meal service passed in uneasy quiet. Clara moved on, her smile brittle, her hands stiff. No one around her believed it anymore. The performance of polite service had cracked, and beneath it lay something rawer, uglier. Marcus sat rigid, his arm draped protectively along the back of Jordan's seat. He felt his son lean subtly into him, the smallest gesture of trust. Danielle pressed her hand against his, anchoring them both. In his mind, Marcus replayed every second, every word. He knew this wasn't over. The escalation was only beginning, and the line had been crossed. His family had been targeted, his son humiliated, his wife forced to plead for basic humanity. He had fought cases like this for strangers. Now the case was his own, and it was happening in real time. He looked down at Leah, who was reviewing the video quietly. Her young face was pale but determined. "Dad," she whispered, "they can't say it didn't happen. Not this time." Marcus kissed the top of her head, his voice steady even as his chest tightened. "That's right, baby girl. Not this time." The cabin lights had dimmed further, the windows outside showing nothing but a vast stretch of black sky and faint stars. Inside, the hum of the engines mixed with the occasional cough, the clatter of ice and plastic cups, and the muted flicker of in-flight screens. For most passengers, it was another night flight. For the Ellington family, it was a storm slowly tightening its grip. Jordan sat rigid in his seat, arms folded across his chest. The pill had steadied his heartbeat, but not the tension carved into his features. He tried to stare out at the night, but his reflection in the window stared back. Tired, wounded. Marcus leaned toward him. "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine," Jordan muttered, his voice low, but his shoulders betrayed him, trembling just slightly. "You don't have to be fine," Marcus said gently. He reached out, squeezing his son's hand. "Not after that." Jordan let out a shaky breath. I didn't do anything wrong. I asked for water, that's all. Why does she keep looking at me like I'm—" He stopped himself, biting down hard on his lip. "Like you're a problem." Marcus finished for him. His jaw tightened. You're never the problem." Danielle reached across the aisle, resting her hand on her son's knee. "Ah, listen to your father. What's happening isn't about you, sweetheart. It's about her. Don't carry what doesn't belong to you." Leah, still clutching her camcorder, whispered, "The world's going to see it. They'll know it wasn't his fault." Marcus looked at her, gratitude in his eyes. "That matters. Leah, more than you know." A sudden announcement from the intercom broke the fragile quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice drawled, calm and professional, "we're experiencing mild turbulence ahead. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The seatbelt light pinged overhead, a sharp reminder that no one could move freely now. As the plane dipped gently, Clara appeared again, walking the aisle with stiff precision. Marcus's eyes followed her every step. He could see the set of her shoulders, the rigid tilt of her chin. She was still carrying herself with authority, but there was something else there now, too, defensiveness. The murmurs from passengers, the raised phones, the watchful stares had stripped away her mask of untouchable control. When she stopped at their row, she looked directly at Jordan. Her voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut. "You need to control yourself. This is a flight, not your playground." Danielle shot up from her seat. "That's enough." He asked for water. He asked to take his medication. And you've done nothing but block him. You're harassing a child. Clara's eyes flicked to Danielle, then to Marcus. Your family is disruptive. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Marcus rose slowly, towering over her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Years in courtrooms had taught him how to wield calm like a blade. "The only disruption on this plane," he said evenly, "is standing in front of me right now." Phones angled higher. Janet Morales set her notebook aside, her phone recording as well. Derek Lane sat straighter, ready if things turned physical. Clara's lips pressed into a thin smile, the kind that wasn't amusement, but a warning. "Watch yourself. You think recording is going to help. When we land, your family will be the ones answering questions, not me." Jordan flinched, shrinking into his seat. Leah gasped softly, clutching her camera tighter. Danielle's voice trembled with restrained fury. "She's threatening us. Marcus." He placed a steadying hand on his wife's shoulder. "I heard." Then he leaned closer to Clara, his voice still low. "Every word you say is being documented. Every action you take is evidence. When we land, you won't answer to us. You'll answer to the law." For a moment, silence stretched between them, a battle of wills in the narrow aisle. Then Clara turned sharply on her heel, striding toward the galley. But the tension she left behind didn't ease, it thickened, pressing on the Ellingtons like a weight. Jordan's hand shook as he fumbled with his seatbelt buckle. "Dad, I don't feel safe here." Marcus's heart clenched. He reached for his son's hands, steadying them. "I know. And I promise you, we're going to get through this," Leah whispered. "The live stream's still going. People are commenting like crazy. They're saying to hold on, that they're with us." Marcus looked at her phone briefly. Lines of text scrolled across the screen: support, outrage, demands for accountability. The outside world was entering the cabin, even at 30,000 feet. Danielle leaned closer to Marcus, her voice barely audible. "She's not going to stop." "Marcus, she's looking for an excuse." "I know," he said. "And when she makes her move, we'll be ready." He sat back, eyes fixed on the dark aisle ahead. His thoughts churned. He had spent years navigating systems built to deny voices like his. He had won cases others thought unwinnable, had walked into courtrooms where juries were primed against his clients before a word was spoken. He knew how to fight, but he had never wanted the fight to find his children. Jordan leaned into him, exhaustion pulling at his features. "Dad," he murmured. "Why me?" Marcus swallowed hard, forcing steadiness into his voice. "Because some people can't see past their own fear. They see difference and mistake it for danger. But that's their blindness, not yours." Jordan nodded faintly, though Marcus knew the words were only seeds, not yet roots. It would take time, maybe years, to untangle the sting of this night. The plane jolted again, shaking cups and trays. Passengers murmured, adjusting seatbelts. Clara reappeared briefly, glancing down the aisle, her gaze cold and unrelenting when it landed on the Ellingtons. Marcus met it head-on, refusing to yield. He thought of his father again, of the way the old man had once told him, "You don't choose the fights. Son, they choose you. And when they do, You show them you were born ready. Marcus felt that truth in his bones now. The fight had chosen him. It had chosen his son. And as the plane cut through the night, the pressure mounting, he knew the breaking point was near. The cabin was cloaked in artificial night, but no one in row 2 could rest. Jordan leaned against Marcus's shoulder, his body tense even in stillness. Danielle stroked her son's hair gently, her lips moving in silent prayer. Leah shifted in her seat, her camcorder steady. Though her young hands trembled, every second of footage mattered now. She knew it without anyone telling her. Clara Hastings moved with deliberate steps down the aisle again. Something in her expression had changed. The forced composure was gone, replaced with simmering irritation, as if the weight of passengers' stares only deepened her resolve. She reached the Ellington's row, stopping short. "Stand up," she said coldly, eyes locked on Jordan. Marcus froze. "Why, he's causing a disturbance," Clara replied. Her hand hovered near her belt, where the outline of a small black case was visible. "For the safety of this flight, he needs to be restrained." Gas rippled through the nearby passengers. Someone whispered, "She's not serious." Another muttered, "This is going too far." Phones tilted higher, recording from every angle. Danielle stood quickly, shielding her son with her body. "He's 16. He hasn't done anything wrong. You are harassing him, and it's on camera." Clara's jaw tightened. "Step aside, ma'am." Marcus rose, his height and calm presence filling the narrow space. His voice was a low, commanding baritone. "If you lay one hand on my son, you'll answer for it in court, in the press, and before God himself." But Clara's hand snapped open the case at her side. Inside gleamed the taser, compact yet menacing. Her fingers wrapped around it with practiced familiarity. "Last warning," she hissed. Leah whispered, barely audible over the pounding of her own heart. "Dad!" Jordan's voice cracked. "I didn't do anything." His cry pierced the hum of the engines, raw and frightened, pulling every passenger's attention to him. In a blur of movement, Clara raised the taser. There was a pause, a heartbeat of silence, and then a crackling flash filled the cabin. The sound was violent, the blue arc of electricity lighting the darkness for an instant. Jordan convulsed, his body jerking violently before collapsing against his seat. Danielle screamed, catching him as his limbs went limp. Marcus lunged forward, his roar shaking the air. Enough chaos erupted. Passengers shouted. Phones recorded. A woman sobbed loudly. Someone shouted for the captain. Marcus gripped the taser with one hand, forcing Clara's arm down with strength born not just of muscle, but of fury sharpened by years of injustice. She stumbled back, shock flickering across her face. For the first time, her control had slipped. Danielle held Jordan's trembling body, her clinical training fighting against the mother's panic flooding her. "Pulse is weak," she muttered. "He's in shock." "Marcus, we need medical help now." Marcus turned, his voice booming through the cabin. "Is there a doctor on board then?" Two passengers rose immediately, a young woman in scrubs and an older man carrying a worn medical bag. They rushed forward, kneeling beside Jordan as Danielle guided them. Marcus stood over them, shielding the scene, his body a wall against further harm. Leah's camera never faltered. Tears streaked her cheeks, but she whispered to herself like a mantra, "Keep recording, keep recording, keep recording." Janet Morales pushed into the aisle, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Clara Hastings, you've assaulted a minor with a prohibited weapon. Sit down immediately. You are under citizen's arrest until we land." Clara's face drained of color. For a moment she looked around, as if searching for support among the passengers. But what she found instead were dozens of unyielding eyes and lenses pointed at her. Derek Lane stepped forward, his voice steady, unshakable. "I'm a retired LAPD sergeant. If you move 1 inch toward that boy again, I will detain you myself. You've gone too far." The power in the cabin shifted completely. Clara, once the authority, was now the accused. She backed away slowly, her grip on the taser loosening until it fell into the aisle with a dull clatter. Derek kicked it aside. Placing his foot firmly on it, Marcus knelt by his son, brushing Jordan's damp hair back. "Stay with me, son. You're stronger than this. You hear me." Jordan's eyes fluttered, his lips moving faintly. Marcus bent lower, catching the whisper, "I'm trying." Marcus pressed his forehead against his son's for a brief moment, his chest breaking. "That's enough. Just keep trying. I've got you." The cabin fell into an odd hush noise still filled it, but beneath it all was a collective focus, a unity forged in outrage. Strangers leaned into the aisle, offering water, blankets, moral support. Phones streamed live to thousands, perhaps millions now, each viewer becoming a witness. The young doctor pressed her stethoscope to Jordan's chest, nodding quickly. "He's stable, but weak. We need him on the ground as soon as possible." Danielle looked up at Marcus, her eyes wide, desperate. "We have to land." Marcus's jaw clenched. He rose to his full height, his presence commanding. With steady steps, he strode toward the front of the cabin, ignoring Clara, ignoring the chaos. He stopped outside the cockpit door and knocked firmly. When the intercom crackled, he spoke in a tone that allowed no argument. "This is Marcus Ellington. I'm an attorney and the father of the boy just assaulted by your crew. You need to divert this plane and land immediately. My son's life depends on it." The pilot's voice, calm but hesitant, filtered back. "Sir, we're over Nevada airspace. Closest option is Las Vegas. I'll contact air traffic control." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Exhaling, "Do it. Every second counts." He turned, walking back down the aisle. Clara sat rigid in her jump seat now, her eyes dark with something unreadable fear, anger, denial. But she was silent. Her authority had been stripped, and the plane itself no longer belonged to her. Marcus returned to his family. Crouching beside Jordan, he touched Danielle's shoulder. Grounding her, he looked at Leah, whose hand still clutched the camcorder. "You're brave," he whispered. "Don't stop now." Leah nodded fiercely, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I won't. Dad." The plane shuddered slightly as it began its descent. Marcus's heart pounded with the engines, every beat echoing the same truth: nothing would ever be the same again. The hum of the engines deepened as the captain began guiding the plane downward. The sudden shift in altitude pressed lightly against everyone's chest. But for Marcus Ellington, the weight he felt wasn't physical. It was the gravity of what had just happened. His son lay trembling in Danielle's arms. His daughter sat gripping the camcorder like it was a lifeline. And the entire cabin was charged with an energy that wouldn't be forgotten. Marcus kept one hand steady on Jordan's knee. The boy's breathing was shallow but consistent now, his eyelids fluttering as he drifted in and out of awareness. Danielle's voice never stopped, soft murmurs like a metronome of comfort. "You're safe, baby. You're safe. We've got you. Around them." Passengers whispered to each other, their voices weaving a chorus of outrage and disbelief. Snippets floated to Marcus's ears, never seen anything like this. Unbelievable abuse of power. Poor kid. Some voices trembled with anger, others with guilt that they hadn't stepped in sooner. But now, they were witnesses, and their silence had turned into a vow to remember. Leah adjusted her camera slightly, zooming in on her brother's face, then back to Clara, who sat stiffly in her jump seat near the galley. Clara's eyes flicked from side to side, never meeting anyone's gaze for more than a second. The taser lay secured under Derek Lane's foot, the retired officer's calm authority making clear it would go nowhere until law enforcement boarded. Janet Morales closed her notebook and looked directly at Marcus. Her voice was quiet, but carried the firmness of someone accustomed to the weight of justice. "Mr. Ellington, when we land, I'll accompany your family. I'll personally make sure local authorities understand exactly what happened here." Marcus inclined his head in gratitude. His throat was tight, his voice a gravelly whisper when he replied, "Thank you. I know too well how these things can be twisted," Derek added, his voice even. "Not this time. Too many witnesses, too many cameras. They can't spin this one away." The plane jolted slightly as turbulence brushed against its frame, drawing a few startled gasps. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for an emergency landing in Las Vegas. Please remain in your seats. Seatbelts fastened. Medical personnel will meet us upon arrival." Danielle pressed her forehead to Jordan's, whispering, "Hear that? Baby help's waiting for you. Just a little longer." Jordan's lips moved faintly. "Mom, it hurts." Her heart shattered, but she forced her voice steady. "I know, but you're strong. You're stronger than this." Marcus's chest tightened with a mixture of rage and helplessness. He had spent years training himself to stay composed under pressure, to wield logic and words as his weapons. But watching his son's body quake from a weapon that should never have been there, it ignited something primal. Still, he couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. His family needed him steady. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses leaned forward. "I'm a journalist," he said quietly. "Name's Peter Grant. I don't usually insert myself, but people need to know. If your family consents, I'd like to report this firsthand the moment we land." Leah looked at her father, eyes wide. Marcus studied the man for a long moment. He saw no sensationalism in his expression, only a raw determination. "We'll talk after we're on the ground," Marcus replied. "Right now, my son comes first." The descent grew steeper. The cabin lights flickered slightly before stabilizing, illuminating weary, tense faces. Passengers clutched armrests, not from fear of flying, but from fear of what had unfolded among them. Each person had become part of a story larger than themselves. Clara finally spoke, her voice low but audible in the tense quiet. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Dozens of heads turned toward her, disbelief etched across their faces. A young woman snapped, "We saw you! Everyone saw you!" A man near the back shouted, "You tasered a child!" Phones lifted higher, recording her denial in real time. Marcus didn't rise this time. He simply looked at her with a gaze colder than ice, his words measured. "The only person who minimized anything here was you. And when this plane lands, the world will know exactly what you did." Clara's mouth opened as if to argue, but the words caught in her throat. For the first time, Marcus saw fear there, not empathy, not regret, but the dawning realization that her authority had evaporated and been replaced with consequences. The minutes stretched long as the plane cut through layers of atmosphere, each moment bringing them closer to the runway. Leah whispered into the camera, not for her father, not for her mother, but for whoever was watching on the other side of the screen. "We're about to land. If you're seeing this, Please don't let them forget. Please don't let them say it didn't happen." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, silently repeating his daughter's words in his heart. Don't let them forget. Don't let them erase this. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thud. A ripple of anticipation ran through the cabin. Danielle squeezed Marcus's hand, her other arm wrapped tightly around Jordan. He was pale but conscious now, his eyes half open, his chest rising and falling in shallow but steady rhythm. The final descent was rough, wheels screeching against the tarmac before the plane slowed, rattling and jerking passengers in their seats. Gasps of relief mixed with murmurs of fear. As the aircraft rolled to a halt, Marcus saw flashing red and blue lights through the window. Emergency vehicles swarmed the runway, paramedics waiting at the ready. The intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated. Medical and security personnel will be boarding shortly. Thank you for your cooperation." Marcus turned to his family. "We're almost there," he whispered, though his voice was thick with emotion. Leah lowered her camera for the first time in hours, slipping her small hand into her father's. "Dad, you're going to make sure they listen, right?" He squeezed her hand firmly. "They'll listen, Leah. I promise you." The doors opened, the cool night air rushing in. Uniformed paramedics hurried down the aisle with equipment bags. At the same time, 2 police officers entered, followed closely by airport security. Marcus rose, steadying Danielle as she helped Jordan sit upright. The boy's face was pale, but when the paramedics crouched beside him, his eyes met his father's, filled with something fragile yet unbroken. Trust. Marcus brushed a hand over his son's cheek. "You're safe now. Let them help you." The officers moved quickly, securing Clara Hastings where she sat frozen. Handcuffs clicked, a sound that echoed like a final verdict. Passengers broke into hushed murmurs, some even applauding quietly, relief mingling with justice. Marcus exhaled, his hand still steady on Jordan's shoulder. The descent was over, but the real fight, was only beginning. The cabin was a storm of movement, now paramedics kneeling beside Jordan, police officers guiding Clara Hastings into custody, and passengers craning their necks to capture every second on their phones. The red and blue lights flashing outside spilled into the plane like waves, painting everything in harsh strokes of justice and chaos. Marcus stayed crouched by his son's side, one hand gripping Jordan's arm as the medic slid an oxygen mask over his face. Danielle gave rapid answers to their questions: heart rate, medication schedule, the taser shock, his reaction. Her voice was clipped but calm, the way only a professional who had walked families through emergencies could sound. Yet her eyes betrayed the fear she refused to let loose. "Stable for now," one medic confirmed. "But he needs monitoring in the ER. Possible arrhythmia from the shock." Marcus nodded firmly. "Then he goes now." His voice was steady, unyielding, a command wrapped in the tone of a man used to being obeyed. 2 officers approached, their posture cautious, respectful. One spoke. "Mr. Ellington, we need a statement once your son is secure. We've detained the flight attendant, and we're preserving the evidence." Marcus met his gaze without blinking. "You'll have my statement, but my family comes first." Leah shifted closer, her camcorder still recording despite the chaos. Marcus touched her hand gently. "Enough, baby. You've done more than anyone could have asked. You can put it down now." But Leah shook her head fiercely, her young face lit with a determination that startled even her father. "No, Dad. They'll twist it if we don't keep showing it. Everyone's watching already." Marcus exhaled slowly, torn between pride and sorrow. He let her keep filming. Sometimes even a child understood when truth was too fragile to set aside. The aisle cleared as paramedics carefully lifted Jordan onto a stretcher, securing straps across his chest. His eyes fluttered open briefly, and Marcus bent low so only his son could hear. "I'll be right behind you. Always." Jordan's lips formed the word "okay" before his eyes slipped shut again. Danielle walked beside the stretcher, one hand never leaving her son's arm as the medics wheeled him toward the exit. Passengers leaned aside, some whispering words of support. "Stay strong. We're with you. Justice for your boy." Marcus heard everyone, their voices a strange chorus of strangers turned allies. As he followed, a hand touched his sleeve. It was Janet Morales, her expression firm. "I'll ride with you. My office will open a federal case before the night is over. You're not alone in this." Marcus gave her a brief nod, his gratitude wordless but profound. Behind them, Derek Lane was speaking firmly to the officers guarding Clara. "Check that taser's serial number. It'll tell you everything how she got it, whether it was logged. Don't let this vanish into paperwork." His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too many cover-ups. Outside, the night air hit Marcus like a wave, sharp with jet fuel and desert wind. The stretchers moved swiftly across the tarmac toward an ambulance waiting with its back doors open. Danielle climbed in beside Jordan, her hand still clutching his. Marcus helped Leah up into the vehicle, then turned to Janet and Derek, who had followed them out. "Ride with us," he told Janet. "Your presence could make the difference when we hit that hospital." She nodded, climbing in after them. Derek gave Marcus a firm handshake. "I'll follow in my car. If they try anything shady, I'll be there." The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the siren wailed to life. Marcus sat pressed against the wall, his knees nearly touching the stretcher. Leah leaned into his side, the camcorder finally lowered, but still warm from hours of recording. She whispered, "People online are saying his name. They're saying Jordan Ellington." Marcus swallowed hard, a tear burning at the corner of his eye. He kissed the top of her head. Then he'll never be invisible again. The ride was fast, the city lights of Las Vegas blurring past the windows. Danielle leaned close to Jordan, her voice steady despite the tears streaking her face. "Almost there, sweetheart. Just hold on." Marcus's phone buzzed relentlessly in his pocket. He glanced down dozens of missed calls, texts flooding in from colleagues, board members, journalists, even political leaders. The live stream had detonated across the country in real time. Hashtags already trended, why justice for Jordan, flying while black, truth in the sky. But Marcus tuned it out for now. His world was reduced to the steady beep of the monitor, the shallow rise and fall of his son's chest, the fierce grip of his daughter's hand. When the ambulance screeched to a halt at the hospital bay, doors flew open, medical teams rushed forward, transferring Jordan swiftly inside. Danielle went with them, her figure disappearing down the fluorescent-lit hallway. Marcus paused at the threshold. Leah pressed to his side, Janet at his shoulder. The weight of what had happened hit him fully for the first time. His son was fighting for recovery. His wife was holding herself together by threads. His daughter had carried the truth in her small, trembling hands, and the eyes of a nation were already on them. He clenched his fists, drawing a breath so deep it seemed to scrape the air from his lungs. Then he whispered to himself words he'd repeated in courtrooms, in protests, in private prayers. "They will not bury this." Leah tilted her head up at him. "What did you say?" "Dad." He looked down, his face softening. I said, "We're going to make sure this changes things. For you, for Jordan, for every kid who's ever felt like him." Janet touched his arm lightly. "And you won't be doing it alone. Not this time." The automatic doors closed behind them with a whoosh, sealing off the night. Inside, the fight for truth had only begun. The hospital's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright, too sterile, casting sharp angles across the waiting room. Marcus sat on the edge of a stiff chair, elbows braced against his knees, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Leah curled into his side, her head resting against his arm. The camcorder on her lap at last switched off, but still clutched as if it were part of her. Danielle was with Jordan in the trauma unit. She had insisted, her voice steady, but her eyes blazing with the quiet fury of a mother who would not be separated from her child. Marcus hadn't argued. He knew her presence there was as vital to Jordan's survival as any machine or medication. The sliding doors at the far end opened, and Janet Morales entered, her heels clicking against the linoleum. She carried herself with the kind of composure that only years of navigating tense rooms could forge. She nodded toward Marcus and lowered herself into the chair beside him. "The local police have filed preliminary charges against Clara Hastings," Janet said, her voice calm but edged with determination. "Assault with a deadly weapon, child endangerment, unlawful possession of a restricted device. She won't walk away from this easily." Marcus nodded slowly. His jaw tightened at the words. "Charges are only the beginning. You and I both know how often cases like this slip through the cracks." Janet met his gaze squarely. "Not this time. You have witnesses, video evidence, a live broadcast that half the country is already talking about. She didn't just assault your son. Mr. Ellington. She exposed a system that enabled her. That's where the fight will go next." Leah stirred, lifting her head. "People online are still watching. Dad, they keep asking if Jordan's okay. They keep saying they believe us." Marcus brushed her hair back from her face, his hand trembling slightly. "He's going to be okay," he told her, though his voice wavered just enough to betray his fear. Across the waiting room, Peter Grant appeared, the journalist who had introduced himself on the plane. His notepad was tucked under one arm, his phone in hand. He approached cautiously, his tone gentle. "Mr. Ellington, I'm sorry to intrude. I know this is the worst possible moment. But this story is already bigger than any of us. If you want to control the narrative, it has to start now." Marcus stared at him for a long moment. The lawyer in him bristled at the timing. The father in him wanted to push the man away. But another voice inside, one that had fought too many battles, reminded him of the truth. Silence was dangerous. Silence allowed others to define you. "Not here," Marcus said finally. "Not while my son's fighting for stability. But when he's safe, when Danielle says it's okay, then we'll talk. And when we do, it'll be the truth. Nothing polished, nothing hidden." Peter nodded, stepping back without protest. The minutes stretched. Each second felt like an hour, the clock on the wall mocking Marcus with its steady ticks. He had sat in many waiting rooms before outside courtrooms, beside clients, in hospital wings where strangers' lives hung in balance. But never like this. Never with his own son behind closed doors. He found himself whispering silently, words he hadn't spoken aloud in years' prayers. They came haltingly at first, fragments of his mother's voice when she prayed over him as a boy. "Keep him safe. Keep him breathing. Don't take him from me now." Leah's hand slipped into his, grounding him. "Dad," she whispered. "Yes, baby girl." You always told us that when bad things happen, we should tell the truth. That's what I did. But what if it's not enough? Marcus turned to her, his heart cracking at the vulnerability in her eyes. He cupped her face gently. It's more than enough. Leah, you gave the world eyes when it wanted to look away. That's the bravest thing anyone could have done. Her lips trembled, but she nodded, leaning into his palm. At that moment, Danielle appeared at the doorway, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion, but her expression steady. Marcus shot to his feet, searching her face for answers. He's stable, she said, her voice breaking just slightly on the word. They've run scans. No permanent damage so far. He needs observation. But he's alive. He's safe. Marcus's chest collapsed in relief, his hands covering his face as a sob tore free. Quiet, rough, but unstoppable. Danielle crossed the room quickly, wrapping her arms around him. For a moment, the world shrank to the two of them clinging together, parents who had survived the longest night of their lives. Leah pressed against them too, her small arms around both her parents. I knew he'd make it, she whispered fiercely. I knew. Marcus kissed her hair, then Danielle's temple. We'll never let him go through this again. Never. Janet stepped forward. I'll give you a moment, but soon. The authorities will want your statement, and the press will not wait. Marcus nodded against his wife's shoulder, then straightened. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but glowed with fire. Then let them come. We'll be ready. Danielle squeezed his hand, her voice soft but strong. Just remember, Marcus Jordan needs his father as much as the world needs your voice. Don't let one take you from the other. He kissed her hand, whispering, I won't. Outside the hospital, Marcus knew. The world was already awake. Screens glowed in living rooms across the country. Hashtags blazed across feeds. Politicians and CEOs and activists were all weighing in. But inside this waiting room, for now, he was just a father holding on to the hope that his family had survived the storm. Morning light bled through the hospital windows, turning the waiting room into a softer, less hostile space. The desert sun rose fast, painting the skyline of Las Vegas in hues of gold and red. Marcus sat straighter now, his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair, his shirt rumpled from hours of wear. He looked like a man who had spent the night fighting, not in a courtroom, but in the trenches of fear and resolve. Jordan was sleeping under observation, Danielle resting in the chair beside his bed. Nurses checked his vitals regularly, their footsteps and hushed voices drifting in and out of Marcus's awareness. For the first time in hours, Marcus allowed himself to unclench his fists. His son was alive, breathing, healing, but outside the hospital walls, the storm was only gathering strength. Leah sat near the corner, scrolling through her phone with wide eyes. She had finally set down her camcorder, but the live stream had already been mirrored, clipped, and spread like wildfire. She read aloud softly, almost to herself. Oh, justice for Jordan. 10 million views. Dad. There are people outside. Protesters already. Marcus's eyes sharpened. Already Leah nodded. They're chanting his name. Some are holding signs with the picture I posted. Janet Morales returned then, a paper cup of coffee in her hand and a stack of folders under her arm. Her blazer was creased, her hair pulled back into a tight bun, but her presence radiated authority. Marcus, the Las Vegas PD wants your statement now, and the FAA has opened an inquiry. The Department of Justice is moving faster than I've ever seen. Marcus stood slowly, straightening his shirt. They'll get their statement. but I won't let this turn into a soundbite they can bury." Janet's lips curved faintly. "Good, because whether you like it or not, you're already the face of this. People are watching." Peter Grant appeared again, notepad ready but his tone respectful. "Mr. Ellington, I know timing is hard, but the public is hearing fragments, rumors, speculation. If you don't speak now, someone else will define the story." Marcus studied him, weighing the risk. He had spent his life choosing words carefully, shaping narratives in court, in boardrooms. But this was different. This was his family. Still, he knew Janet and Peter were right. The silence would be filled, and not by allies. He glanced toward Leah, who was watching him with expectant eyes. "You showed them the truth," he told her. "Now it's my turn." Minutes later, Marcus stood behind a podium hastily assembled in a hospital conference room. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters crowded the aisles. Microphones pointed like spears. Janet stood nearby, flanked by police officers and hospital staff. Leah sat in the front row, her phone still rolling. Danielle remained upstairs with Jordan, but Marcus felt her strength pulsing in him, even from afar. He cleared his throat, the room silencing instantly. His voice carried, calm yet edged with steel. "My name is Marcus Ellington. I am a father, a husband, an attorney, and the CEO of Ellington Strategies. But today, none of that matters as much as this. I am the father of a 16-year-old boy who was assaulted on a flight simply because of who he is." Flashes went off. Pens scratched furiously across notepads. Marcus continued, "My son, Jordan, asked for water to take his prescribed medication. He asked to use the restroom. For this, he was denied, humiliated, and ultimately attacked with a taser by a flight attendant entrusted with the safety of every passenger. He nearly lost his life. And the only reason we are here today instead of mourning him is because strangers on that flight had the courage to record what happened and to stand with us." He paused, scanning the room. The silence was thick, heavy with collective breath. This is not just about one flight attendant. This is about a culture that allows bias to fester in spaces where dignity should be non-negotiable. It is about a system where authority can be abused with impunity until it is caught on camera. And it is about the reality that, in America, even a boy in first class with his family, his ticket paid, his future bright, can still be treated as less than human. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some reporters nodded, others frowned, already thinking of their headlines. Marcus steadied himself, his voice rising just slightly. "I want to be clear, we are not asking for sympathy. We are demanding accountability. Accountability for Clara Hastings, who abused her power. Accountability for the airline that employed her and allowed this culture to thrive. And accountability for the institutions that too often look the other way until someone bleeds." Leah's eyes shone with tears as she listened. Marcus caught her gaze, anchoring himself in her presence. "We will pursue every avenue legal, civil, and public to ensure this is not swept under the rug, and we will not stop until reforms are made so that no other child, no other family, has to endure what we endured 30,000 feet in the air." Reporters erupted with questions, hands shooting up. Marcus raised a hand, silencing them briefly. His final words came softer, but carried farther than any shout could. "My son's name is Jordan Ellington. Say it, remember it, because no child should ever have to carry the weight of survival just to get home." The room broke into chaos questions, flashes. the buzz of phones transmitting his words across the world. Marcus stepped back, his jaw tight, his chest rising and falling with the release of something that had burned inside him all night. Janet moved to his side, whispering, "You just lit a fire they can't put out." Peter Grant caught his eye, mouthing a silent thank you before scribbling notes furiously. As Marcus left the podium, Leah rushed to his side, her arms wrapping around his waist. "You did it, Dad," she whispered fiercely. "You made them listen." Marcus held her close, his lips pressing to her forehead. "We're just getting started." By the time Marcus returned upstairs to Jordan's hospital room, the sun had fully risen, casting shafts of gold through the blinds. The conference room still echoed in his mind, the flashes, the questions, the weight of his own words hanging in the air like verdicts. But all of that faded the moment he saw his son lying in the narrow bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily, each sound both reassuring and terrifying. Danielle sat at Jordan's side, her hand curled around his. She looked up when Marcus entered, exhaustion etched deep into her face, but her eyes softened. "He stirred a little while you were gone. Asked for you." Marcus moved to the bedside, taking Jordan's other hand in both of his. "I'm here, son. Always." Jordan's eyelids fluttered open, his gaze hazy but searching. When he saw his father, his lips curved faintly. "Dad, did you stop her?" The question pierced Marcus deeper than any accusation could have. He leaned down, his voice breaking with quiet intensity. "Yes, Jordan. She'll never hurt you or anyone else again, and the world knows what she did." Jordan nodded faintly, then let his eyes close again, drifting back into rest. Danielle stroked his hair, whispering, "He's fighting. That's all that matters right now." Marcus sat back, his shoulders heavy with both relief and fury. He wanted to give his son the peace of safety, but the reality was larger than this room. The fight outside was already spreading, and the fault lines were showing. Leah entered, phone still in her hand. "Dad," she said carefully, "I think you need to see this." She handed him the screen. It displayed a news broadcast, live from outside the hospital. Protesters filled the sidewalks, their voices carrying into the sky. Some held signs, "Justice for Jordan," flying. "While black is not a crime. Accountability now." But not all the coverage was supportive. On another channel, a commentator leaned forward at a desk, his tone sharp. "Let's remember, we don't know all the details yet. Disruptions on planes are serious. Flight attendants are under pressure. Was the response excessive? Maybe. But we shouldn't jump to conclusions until we see the full investigation." Marcus's jaw tightened. The rewriting had already begun. Even with video, even with witnesses, there were still voices eager to dilute the truth. Janet Morales entered then, a tablet under her arm. She caught the tension in his face instantly. "You've seen it too. They're already trying to muddy the water. But you have leverage, public sympathy, federal backing, and the undeniable evidence your daughter captured." Marcus exhaled, running a hand over his face. "They'll say we exaggerated, that Jordan was disruptive. They'll drag his name through the mud to protect themselves." Janet's eyes hardened. "Then we get ahead of it. Every detail documented, every witness statement secured. We close the cracks before they can widen." Leah tugged her father's sleeve gently. "People believe us, Dad. More people than don't. You have to remember that." Her words were a balm, though Marcus could still feel the tension building. He kissed her forehead softly. "You're right, baby girl. And because they believe us, we can't stop now." Later that morning, Derek Lane arrived, his presence filling the doorway with quiet authority. His plain clothes couldn't hide the weight of decades in uniform. He carried a small folder, which he handed directly to Marcus. I pulled strings. That taser, it wasn't logged by the airline. Hastings brought it aboard herself, against regulations. It strengthens the case. Marcus opened the folder, scanning the preliminary report. His pulse quickened. This is the nail in the coffin. Maybe, Derek said evenly. But you know how these things work. They'll try to paint her as one bad apple, sacrifice her, keep the system intact. Marcus met his gaze, grim understanding passing between them. Then we don't let them. This isn't just about her. It's about every crack in the system that allowed her to think she could do this. The room fell quiet for a moment, the gravity of the task settling over them. Danielle broke it softly, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Then we need to decide right now, are we just protecting our family, or are we ready to fight for every family? Marcus reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. He looked at Leah, whose young eyes were already older than they should be, and at Jordan, asleep but breathing. The answer was clear. We fight, Marcus said firmly. Janet nodded. Then we need structure. Legal action against the airline. A civil rights complaint with the DOJ. Media coordination to keep the truth consistent. And a coalition will need allies. Peter Grant stepped into the room then, almost on cue. He looked tired but resolute, his notepad tucked under his arm. You'll have my coverage. Fair. Unfiltered. I've already seen too many networks trying to spin it. But the raw footage. The testimony that's unshakable. Give me access, and I'll make sure the story doesn't die. Marcus studied him, then glanced at Danielle. She gave a small nod. Finally, Marcus extended his hand. All right, Mr. Grant, you'll have access, but you tell the truth, all of it, even the parts that make us bleed. Peter clasped his hand firmly. That's the only way I work. Jordan stirred again, murmuring faintly in his sleep. Danielle smoothed his hair, whispering soothing words. Leah leaned closer to her brother, whispering too, the whole world saying your name. Jordan, you don't even know it yet, but you're changing things. Marcus watched them, his chest aching with both pride and sorrow. His son hadn't asked for this fight, but it had found him, and Marcus would make sure it meant something that the pain carved into this family's story would carve a new path for others. As the morning stretched on, the hospital room became a war room. Janet outlined legal strategies. Derek offered insight into law enforcement procedures. Peter prepared his first full article, and Leah scrolled through messages of support flooding social media. Danielle sat steady at Jordan's side, her quiet strength holding them all together. Marcus finally stood, looking out the window at the crowd gathering below. He could hear their chants faintly through the glass, a chorus rising in unison. Justice for Jordan. Justice for Jordan. He placed his hand against the glass, his reflection staring back at him. He whispered to himself, "This is bigger than us now." "Behind him," Janet said softly. "Then let's make sure it's big enough to break the system." Marcus turned, his expression carved in stone. "We will." The hospital room had become a command post, but Marcus could feel the strain pressing against its walls. Every conversation about legal filings, every chant rising from the street below, every vibrating phone notification was a reminder that the world was demanding answers faster than his family could heal. Danielle sat silently by Jordan's bed, her eyes fixed on the steady rhythm of the monitor. She hadn't spoken in a while, and Marcus knew that was dangerous. When his wife went quiet, It wasn't surrender. It was the kind of silence that built pressure until it demanded release. He knelt beside her, lowering his voice. "How are you holding up?" Her eyes flicked to him, sharp, tired, but resolute. "I'm holding Jordan up. That's all that matters. But Marcus..." She hesitated, her voice dropping. "What if this destroys us? What if the fight becomes bigger than the family we're trying to protect?" The question cut through him. He wanted to tell her no, to promise that he could control the storm. But his throat tightened. "We can't ignore it. Danny, if we walk away, we tell Jordan and Leah the silence is safer than truth. And I won't let that be their inheritance." She squeezed his hand hard, her eyes wet. "Then you need to promise me something. Promise me that no matter how loud this gets, no matter how far it reaches, you'll still be here. Not as the lawyer, not as the CEO, not as the activist, as their father." Marcus kissed her knuckles, whispering, "I swear it." A knock interrupted them. Janet Morales stepped in, her face taut. "Marcus, I just came from a call with the DOJ. The airline is lawyering up. They've issued a preliminary statement, isolated incident, no reflection of company values. They're painting Hastings as a rogue employee." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "Of course they are. One bad apple defense. Convenient, clean, and entirely false." Derek, leaning against the wall, added, "And if they succeed, she'll go down." "Sure, but the system walks away untouched. They'll keep doing what they've always done." Leah sat up from her corner, her voice small but certain. "Then you can't let them." "Dad, you always told us the law was about more than punishment. It was about changing what comes next." Marcus met her gaze. She was right. It wasn't just about Clara Hastings. It was about dismantling the conditions that had allowed her to act with such confidence. Before he could respond, Peter Grant entered, his notepad in one hand, his phone buzzing in the other. His face was pale. "Marcus, you need to see this." He turned the screen toward them. A news anchor was speaking sharply. "Sources suggest the Ellington family may have exaggerated the events on board. While troubling, it is unclear whether the use of force was entirely unprovoked. The airline has promised a thorough investigation." Marcus's stomach churned. "They're smearing him already." Peter nodded grimly. "I've covered scandals before. They'll dig up anything: school records, medical files, even social media posts. They'll twist the story until people are arguing about details instead of the truth." Danielle's voice cracked with sudden fury. "He's 16, a child, and they'll paint him as a threat to justify this." Marcus's hands balled into fists. "Not this time. We'll fight on every front: legal, public, private. They won't bury him." Janet set her folder on the table, flipping it open. "Then we start now. We need witness affidavits. Every passenger who stood up on that flight. Every video clip verified and archived. And Marcus, you need to prepare for depositions, press hearings, everything. They'll try to exhaust you. Don't let them." Marcus inhaled deeply, centering himself. He had been in battles like this before, though never with stakes this personal. Then let's give them more than they can handle. Outside, the chants grew louder. Leah peeked through the blinds, eyes wide. "Dad, the crowd's doubling. They've got signs with Jordan's picture, and people are live streaming from outside now." Marcus walked to the window, pulling the blinds aside. A sea of people stretched across the sidewalks, their voices weaving into a unified cry. Some carried candles despite the sunlight. Others held banners. "Protect our children. No more excuses. We are Jordan." He felt something shift in his chest. Fear, yes, but also power. This wasn't just his family's burden anymore. It was a shared demand. Derek moved to stand beside him. That's not just a protest. That's a movement waiting to be led. Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked back at Jordan, asleep but breathing steadily, his chest rising under the thin hospital blanket. The boy hadn't asked to be a symbol, hadn't wanted the weight of strangers chanting his name. Yet here it was. Danielle's voice floated across the room, softer now, tinged with resolve. If this is the fight we've been given, then we make it count. For Jordan. For every Jordan. Marcus turned back to the window, his reflection merging with the faces outside. He spoke quietly, but with conviction. Then we lead it. Peter raised his notepad. If that's the road you're taking, Mr. Ellington, the world will follow. But it won't be easy. They'll try to break you before you can break them. Marcus met his gaze squarely. Then let them try. Leah tugged on his sleeve, her young voice trembling but fierce. We won't break. Dad, not if we stand together. Marcus rested a hand on her shoulder, his heart swelling with pride. You're right. Leah, together, we're unbreakable. The room stilled, each person absorbing the weight of what had just been spoken. It was no longer just about survival. It was about transformation, and the line between the two would be drawn in the days to come. The hospital quieted as dusk fell. Though the muffled chants outside never faded, Marcus stood by the window, watching as flickering candlelight spread through the crowd like fireflies. The protest had transformed into a vigil. People held hands, their voices softer now, but steady justice for Jordan. It was both haunting and healing, a sound that wrapped itself around the building like a protective shield. Behind him, the room was a patchwork of exhaustion. Danielle dozed lightly in the chair beside Jordan's bed, her head tilted against the wall, one hand never leaving her son's arm. Leah curled under a blanket in the corner, phone clutched in her hands, even in sleep. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor filled the silence, marking time in a language none of them wanted to hear but all of them depended on. Marcus hadn't slept. His body was taut, his mind a battlefield of rage, fear, and resolve. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flash of the taser, the way Jordan's body had convulsed, the helplessness that had clawed at his chest. He pressed his palms against the window now, grounding himself in the cool glass. A soft knock at the door broke his trance. Janet Morrell slipped in, her face weary but alert. She carried 2 cups of coffee, setting one down on the sill. Thought you could use this. Marcus accepted it, though his hands shook slightly. I don't know how you're still standing. Janet gave a faint smile. I've been through enough long nights in this job to know when sleep is a luxury. Tonight isn't one of those nights. She sat across from him, her voice lowering. I spoke with the U.S. Attorney's Office again. They're preparing to open a civil rights investigation. But Marcus, you need to understand this is going to get uglier before it gets better. The airline has already hired one of the most aggressive PR firms in the country. They'll weaponize doubt, spread half-truths, dig into your family's lives. Marcus's jaw tightened. They want to bury the truth in noise. Exactly, Janet replied, which means you can't just react. You'll need to stay ahead, to set the narrative before they twist it. Marcus let out a humorless laugh. My son is lying in that bed because a woman decided his life was worth less than her pride. And I have to strategize about narratives. Janet's gaze was steady. I wish it weren't so. But if you want justice to last longer than the headlines, this is the fight. You know it as well as I do." The truth of her words stung. He had built his career on shaping systems, not just winning cases. Now, the same skills would determine whether his son's pain changed anything or was reduced to another fleeting story. Derek Lane entered then, carrying a folder under his arm. He looked grave, his voice rough. "I pulled contacts in aviation security. Word is, Hastings wasn't alone. There's a culture among some crew, an unofficial code. They profile passengers, especially people of color. Label them as potential threats, quietly in the system. It's not written policy, but it's practiced." Marcus's eyes darkened. So Jordan wasn't the first. Not by a long shot, Derek said. But he might be the first whose case has proof strong enough to crack it open. Marcus sank into the chair opposite his son's bed, his fists pressing into his thighs. "Then we're not just fighting for him anymore. We're fighting for everyone they've silenced." Peter Grant arrived a few minutes later, notepad brimming with notes. He lowered his voice. "I've been collecting passenger testimonies. Some are ready to go on record. Others are scared, worried about job security, visas, retaliation. But there's a groundswell. Marcus, people want to speak out. They just need someone to lead." Marcus rubbed his temples, exhaustion pressing in. "They'll have me. They'll have us. But we have to protect them, too." Janet nodded. "That's where we come in. Witness protection protocols, legal shields. If we do this right, we build not just a case, but a movement." The room grew heavy with the weight of it all. Marcus looked at his son, sleeping beneath the steady hum of machines. He thought of the years ahead school dances, college applications, first jobs, and wondered how this night would shape all of it. Danielle stirred then, opening her eyes slowly. She caught Marcus's expression and reached for his hand. "Don't carry it all alone," she whispered. "We're in this together. Always." Her words steadied him more than the coffee, more than the strategies piling around him. He squeezed her hand, grounding himself. Later, as midnight approached, Leah woke and shuffled over, rubbing her eyes. She climbed into her father's lap without a word, curling against him the way she had as a toddler. Marcus held her close, his chin resting on her hair. "Dad," she murmured. "Yes." "Baby, do you think Jordan will forgive me for filming instead of helping Marcus's throat tightened? Leah, you saved him. You gave him something no one else could have voiced when he couldn't speak for himself. Don't ever doubt that." Tears welled in her eyes, and she buried her face against his chest. "I just want him to be okay." Marcus kissed the top of her head. "He will. And because of you, a lot of other kids will be okay too." Silence settled again, heavy but not hopeless. Outside, the vigil swelled, candles flickering like stars. Inside, the Ellington family huddled close, a unit bound by pain, by love, and by a resolve that the night could not break. Marcus whispered into the darkness, more to himself than anyone else. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning, the morning after the vigil." Marcus woke in the stiff chair beside Jordan's bed, his neck aching and his mind clouded. He had dozed off only briefly, but the sounds of hushed voices outside the door pulled him back to alertness. Danielle was already awake, brushing her hand gently over Jordan's hair. He looked better, color returning to his cheeks, his breathing steadier, but the machines tethered to him reminded everyone of the fragility beneath the surface. Leah sat cross-legged on the window ledge, scrolling her phone with a frown. "Dad," she said carefully, You need to see this." She handed him the screen. A video was trending, a pundit on a national morning show speaking confidently. "Let's be clear," the man said. "This story is being exaggerated for political gain. Flight attendants are trained to act under pressure. Perhaps the young man was non-compliant. Perhaps the family escalated. We shouldn't vilify an entire industry because of one emotional narrative." Marcus's stomach turned. He scrolled further clips spliced from passengers' recordings taken out of context. Hashtags from opposition accounts. The Ellington exaggeration. Not the whole story. Danielle's jaw tightened. They're doing exactly what we feared. Turning doubt into a weapon. The door opened, and Janet Morales strode in with a laptop. Her expression was grim. "It's coordinated. The airline's PR firm is pushing this hard. They've seeded talking points across networks and are leaking sources, claiming Jordan was aggressive." Marcus slammed the phone down on the table. He's 16. He asked for water and a restroom. And they're branding him a threat. His voice cracked with fury. Derek entered behind her, carrying a stack of documents. They've also pushed police to delay releasing official reports. Standard tactic: control the story while the truth lags behind. He set the papers down with a thud. "But I've got statements from 3 passengers ready to go public, and 2 are professionals, a nurse and a retired teacher. Solid credibility." Peter Grant followed, notepad in hand. "I've drafted the first feature article, balanced but firm, highlighting the pattern Derek uncovered. If we release it with those testimonies, it'll counter their smear campaign." Marcus paced the room, his fists clenching and unclenching. "Every hour they spin this, Jordan's name is dragged through mud. We can't wait for justice to crawl through bureaucracy." Janet closed her laptop sharply. "Then we go offensive. A press conference this afternoon. But not just you this time. Witnesses, allies, and most importantly, the narrative framed as systemic, not isolated." Danielle looked up, exhaustion in her eyes but steel in her voice. "If we fight them, we fight for more than Jordan. That's what you wanted, Marcus. Now prove it." Her words steadied him. He stopped pacing and nodded. "All right. We'll turn their counterattack into proof of the system's corruption. But if they want to make this about politics, then we'll make it about humanity. No one can argue against a child's right to live." Jordan stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. His voice was hoarse but clear. Dad Marcus rushed to his side, taking his hand. "I'm here. Why are they lying about me?" Jordan whispered. His eyes searched his father's face, filled with confusion and hurt. Marcus bent closer, his voice breaking. "Because the truth scares them. But don't you worry, we're going to make sure the world knows exactly who you are, not what they say." Jordan squeezed his hand weakly. "Promise, I promise," Marcus whispered fiercely. Leah climbed off the ledge and stood by the bed. "I've been posting the good clips. Jordan, the ones that show everything. People are fighting back online. They believe you." Jordan smiled faintly, closing his eyes again. "Thanks, sis." Marcus looked at his daughter, pride swelling in his chest. "You've done more than any of us could. Don't stop." By midday, the hospital's conference room was filled again, this time not with reporters alone, but with allies. The nurse who had spoken out on the plane sat nervously beside the retired teacher. A young college student, one of the passengers who had recorded, held her phone tightly as if it were armor. Janet briefed them on what to expect, reassuring them their voices were vital. When Marcus entered, the room quieted. He looked around at the faces of ordinary people who had become unwilling witnesses to something extraordinary. "I know this is terrifying," he told them, his voice low but powerful. But if you speak, you don't just stand for us. You stand for every person who's ever been silenced. And together, our voices are too loud to ignore." The nurse lifted her chin. "I saw what she did to your boy. I won't let them lie about it." The teacher nodded firmly. "We've seen enough injustice in our lifetimes. This one won't be swept under the rug." Marcus felt a swell of gratitude. "Then let's do this." That afternoon, the press room was packed again. Cameras flashing, mics bristling. Marcus spoke first, steady and unyielding, then stepped aside as the witnesses recounted what they had seen. Each story matched, each voice cracking with anger and disbelief. The footage was played in full, uncut, the truth undeniable. Reporters shouted questions about the smear campaign. Janet stepped forward, her voice sharp. "The fact that the airline is spending more resources attacking a child's reputation than acknowledging its own failures tells you everything you need to know. This is not just negligence. It's a culture of bias that must be dismantled." The crowd erupted with more questions, flashes popping like gunfire. But the shift was palpable. The counterattack had backfired. The witnesses, the footage, the unified message it was harder to spin against. Afterward, Marcus returned to Jordan's room, drained but resolute. Leah was back on the window ledge, scrolling again. She looked up, her face brighter. "Dad, it's working. People are flooding the hashtags with support. They're sharing the full video. The smears are getting drowned out." Marcus let out a long breath, finally allowing himself a moment of relief. Danielle smiled faintly, her hand on Jordan's. "You didn't just defend him, Marcus. You turned the tide." He sat beside his son's bed, taking his hand again. "Rest easy, Jordan. The truth is louder than their lies." The air inside the hospital seemed different that evening. Where there had been tension and fear, there was now a flicker of momentum. Marcus felt it in the way nurses whispered encouragement as they passed, in the determined nods from strangers holding vigil outside, in the texts buzzing nonstop on his phone. The narrative was shifting, slowly but unmistakably, away from doubt and toward truth. Jordan was awake more often now, though still weak. He watched from his bed as Leah scrolled through messages, reading them aloud with the excitement of someone who finally realized her voice had power. "Look, Jordan people in Chicago are marching with signs that say, 'We are Jordan.' And here's one from Atlanta students walking out of class, chanting your name." Jordan's eyes widened. "They're doing that." For me, Marcus pulled a chair closer, leaning down so his son could see the conviction in his eyes. "Not just for you, son, for what you represent. You stood where millions of kids could have been, and you survived. Now your story gives them strength." Jordan swallowed hard, emotion flickering across his face. "But I didn't do anything. I just got hurt." Danielle stroked his arm gently. "Sometimes just surviving injustice is an act of courage. You didn't ask for this, Jordan, but you're giving people hope." Peter Grant entered with a stack of newspapers under his arm. He laid them on the table, pages spread open, headlines blared. "Family speaks out after taser incident on flight. Witnesses confirm. Teen assaulted by flight attendant. Protests grow nationwide." Photos of Jordan, pale but alive, filled the front pages. "You've turned the corner," Peter said quietly. "The story is leading every major outlet. The airline's attempts to discredit you are being ridiculed now. People are asking bigger questions about training, about systemic bias, about who gets to feel safe in the skies." Marcus scanned the headlines, his chest tight with a complicated mix of pride and sorrow. "Good. Let them ask. Let them keep asking until the system can't hide anymore. Janet Morales stepped in next, her expression sharper than usual. She placed a document folder on the desk. And while the public shifts, so does the law. The DOJ just filed an official civil rights investigation. It's not just Clara Hastings anymore. It's the airline, their hiring practices, their training protocols, their incident history. It's all under federal review. Danielle let out a soft gasp. Finally, accountability. Marcus met Janet's eyes. How long before they try to settle? They'll float offers soon, Janet replied. Big numbers, hush clauses. They'll try to buy silence before the investigation digs too deep. Leah looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed. We're not taking it. Right. Marcus smiled faintly at her fierceness. No. Leah, this isn't about money. This is about making sure no other family sits in a hospital room like this. Derek Lane arrived later with more revelations. He dropped a file onto the desk, his tone grim. I've confirmed a pattern. At least 7 prior complaints against Hastings, most dismissed as passenger misconduct. And internal memos show supervisors flagging certain passengers as profile risks. It's coded language, but the intent is clear. Marcus flipped through the pages, his fury mounting. They knew. They knew she was dangerous, and they covered it up. Derek nodded. And now you have the paper trail. Peter leaned forward. When this comes out, it won't just be a scandal, it'll be a reckoning. Airlines will have to answer questions they've dodged for years. Jordan shifted slightly in bed, his voice quiet, but steady. Dad, are you going to fix all of it? Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, taking his son's hand. I can't fix the whole world, Jordan, but I can make sure this doesn't disappear. I can make sure they remember your name every time they try to look away. Jordan's eyes filled with tears. I just don't want anyone else to feel like I did. Marcus bent down, pressing his forehead gently against his son's. That's exactly why we're fighting. Outside, the chants had grown again, louder now as evening turned into night. Through the window, Leah pointed. Dad, look, they've lit lanterns. They're floating them into the sky. The family gathered by the window, watching dozens of glowing lanterns rise into the desert night, each one carrying a handwritten message. Some bore Jordan's name. Others said, Never again. Justice is airborne. Children deserve safety. The sight silenced them all, awe mixing with grief and hope. Danielle wiped a tear from her cheek. They're carrying him with them, carrying us. Marcus felt a lump in his throat, his voice breaking softly. Then we can't let them down. That night, when the crowd outside finally thinned, Marcus sat alone at the small hospital desk, drafting notes, legal strategies, speech outlines, coalition ideas. His mind raced, his pen moving without pause. But when he looked up at Jordan sleeping peacefully, Leah curled in a chair nearby, and Danielle resting at his side, he realized the true cost of the fight. He whispered to himself, steady and certain. This is no longer about what they did to us. It's about what we're going to do with it. The third morning in the hospital arrived with a clarity Marcus hadn't felt in days. The desert sun flooded the room, washing the linoleum floor with golden light. Jordan was sitting up now, pale but smiling weakly as a nurse checked his vitals. Danielle hovered nearby, her protective instincts undimmed, but her shoulders had finally relaxed just enough to show relief. Leah perched at the edge of the bed, telling Jordan stories about the crowds outside and showing him messages from classmates, celebrities, even strangers halfway across the world. Jordan chuckled softly, though his voice was still raspy. "I never thought people would know my name like this." Marcus rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "They don't just know your name, Jordan. They know your strength. You've become a light for people who've lived in the dark for too long." Jordan's smile wavered. "But what if I'm not strong enough to be that? What if I just want to be normal again?" Marcus crouched so he was eye level with him. "You don't have to carry the whole weight. That's my fight, son. Yours is just to live, to heal, to grow. Let the rest of us do the heavy lifting." The door opened, and Janet Morale entered with an entourage of federal investigators. Her tone was brisk, efficient. "Mr. Ellington, Mrs. Ellington first. Let me say the investigation has officially expanded. We've subpoenaed internal communications from the airline. There's already evidence of systemic profiling, code words in training manuals, and a pattern of silencing complaints." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "So they knew this was happening." Janet nodded. "Yes, and now they're cornered. The public pressure is unrelenting. Thanks to the protests and your media presence, they've offered a settlement tens of millions, sealed records, a public apology." Marcus didn't hesitate. "We won't take it." Janet allowed a faint smile. "I told them you wouldn't. That's why they're panicking." Derek Lane stepped in next, holding up a folder. "And panic is making them sloppy. I've got copies of memos where executives debated quiet removal of black passengers flagged as disruptive before flights even took off. No legal ground, no violations logged, just silent discrimination." Marcus's hands clenched around the bed rail. "That's not negligence. That's strategy. That's criminal." Peter Grant followed, his phone buzzing nonstop. He had dark circles under his eyes, but a fire in his expression. "And the media's ready. If you approve, I'll release the documents alongside a story tomorrow morning. It'll blow the lid off everything." Marcus looked at his wife, his daughter, then at his son lying in that bed. He saw their exhaustion, their scars, but also their resilience. He turned back to Peter. "Release it. The world deserves to know." Janet nodded approvingly. "Then we prepare for the storm, because once this breaks, they'll come after you harder than ever. Personal attacks, character smears, anything to shift the spotlight." Marcus exhaled slowly, then straightened his shoulders. "Let them. We'll answer with truth and with unity." That afternoon, Marcus and Danielle stood together at the hospital podium again, this time flanked not just by witnesses, but by community leaders, activists, and clergy who had gathered in support. Leah filmed from the front row, her small hands steady on the camcorder. Jordan watched from his bed upstairs, a monitor in the room streaming his father's face. Marcus's voice carried through the microphones, firm and unwavering. "This is no longer just our family's fight. It is every family's fight. The documents we now hold prove what too many have whispered for years. Systemic discrimination is not imagined. It is engineered, and it must end here." The crowd erupted in applause, some shouting Jordan's name, others chanting, "Never again." Danielle stepped forward next, her voice gentler but no less powerful. "I am a mother who nearly lost her child. I cannot undo that pain, but I can make sure it was not in vain. We call on this nation, on its leaders, on its industries do better, because no parent should sit where I sat, wondering if their child would survive a flight home." The press swarmed them with questions, but Marcus answered with precision. He spoke not as a grieving father, but as a strategist, outlining policy changes, oversight measures, accountability protocols. Janet whispered later that his proposals would likely form the backbone of congressional hearings. When the conference ended, Marcus returned upstairs. Jordan looked at him, eyes shining. "You sounded like you were talking to the whole world." Marcus smiled softly, brushing his son's hair back. "That's because I was." And they listened. That night, as the family sat together in the quiet of the hospital room, Leah leaned against her father's arm. "Dad," she whispered. "Yes, baby girl. Do you think it'll really change? Or will they just forget once the noise dies down?" Marcus thought of the documents, the protests, the headlines, the lanterns floating into the night sky. He thought of the way strangers had spoken Jordan's name like a promise. He wrapped an arm around his daughter, pulling her close. It won't be easy, but change never is. What matters is that we don't stop pushing. And with voices as strong as yours, Leah, I don't think the world can forget. Danielle reached for Marcus's hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "We've started something bigger than us," she said softly. "And maybe that's the only way healing ever happens, when pain becomes a bridge for others to cross." Marcus kissed her hand, then looked at his family, his chest heavy with both love and determination. "Then let's build that bridge. For Jordan. For every Jordan yet to come." Outside, the chants rose again, echoing into the desert night. This time, Marcus didn't hear them as noise, but as harmony, a collective voice carrying his son's story far beyond the walls of this hospital. This story is not only about a boy and his family. It is about dignity, resilience, and the cost of silence. For older generations, who have witnessed decades of change and struggle, it is a reminder that injustice does not vanish with time. It adapts, unless we confront it. The lesson here is simple, but profound truth must be spoken, even when it is painful. The Ellington family could have accepted a settlement and disappeared into privacy. Instead, they chose to stand, to endure scrutiny, and to transform their suffering into a bridge for others. In life, we all face moments when we must choose between comfort and courage. For some, it is in defending a loved one. For others, it may be in standing beside a neighbor or colleague who is mistreated. The story teaches us that silence protects the powerful, while truth shared openly and bravely protects the vulnerable. For those of us who are older, who understand the weight of history, the call is clear. Our voices, our choices, still matter. Justice is not only for the young to carry. It is a responsibility we all share, no matter our age. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Stories like this remind us how powerful empathy and justice can be when we stand together. If this story moved you, please give it a like. Share it with your friends and family. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of truth, resilience, and hope to light. Together, we can make sure these voices are never silenced